What is up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Pete Characters Clark, and welcome to episode 80 of the Carrot Poker Podcast. Today's episode is all about a really unique guy, a guy called Mike Matteo, who's on our podcast right now. He's a recreational poker player who has never written a book before, but then decided that he would go ahead and write a poker book off of his own back. How's it going, Mike? Welcome to the show.
Good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Pete.
It's really cool to meet you because I don't think I've interviewed an author before, and I prefer interviewing people who are just like on the aspiring poker player end of the spectrum, because this is like an educational kind of coaching podcast. So to have you on the show, but for you also to be an author, I think is really cool. And we'll get to that in a minute. We'll talk a bit about the book that you've written, and you can tell everyone about that. But tell us a little bit about yourself. So what was the first thing that got you into poker, like originally?
So I live in New Jersey, and in 2013 they legalized online poker in New Jersey. So prior to that, I just played casually at home games, and once in a while I would go to the casino, but I really wasn't really into poker. So once they legalized online poker in my state, I figured I didn't have to drive an hour each way to the casino. I could just go down to the basement, and then I log on and play for a few hours each night and make some money online. But, you know, as you and your listeners probably already know, making money online is not that easy. The players are really skilled and tough online. So I soon found that out.
Yeah, it can be a bit of like jumping in at the deep end, I think, for someone who's maybe played home games or played live, and then they try to play like, I don't know, the same stakes online as live, and like just imagine the shock you'd get these days, right? If you played 200 NL live at the casino, then you jump into like the 200 Zoom pool on PokerStars or something. It's like ice bath time, right? A shock to the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. So when you first started, then I guess like what games did you play, and what were your main like resources for learning the game when you first got into it?
So when I first started, I only play six max cash online, so you know it's perfect for listening to your podcast. I jumped in immediately and played like 50 NL, and I wasn't an experienced player. So, you know, I immediately got ran over and lost my deposit. And, you know, made another deposit, lost that one, start moving down, you know, still losing and still depositing till I was down to like 10 NL. So, I mean, at that point, I mean, for learning tools, I mean, I always loved poker books and audio poker books because I have a 45-minute commute to work. I could listen to poker books and poker podcasts back and forth to work. I mean, I listened to a ton of poker podcasts. And then, you know, from 10NL, I slowly worked my way back up. I mean, I made the classic mistake of as soon as I start winning at 10NL, I went to 25NL, you know, before I even had a good sample size. And, you know, I got run over again and had to move back down. And then at that point, I know I had to methodically stay at a level and master it, and then move up, even like, or staying at the level even too long rather than moving up too quickly. And, you know, continue to study, you know, listen to poker books, you know, do hand analysis using Flopzilla. I mean, a lot of different things.
Cool.
That you can imagine.
Yeah. So when you say run over, did you feel like your main problem then when you started was like a lack of aggression and the other players were more aggressive than you, or how did that go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I had lack of aggression, but you're probably typical going all the way to the river with second best hand, refusing to fold. Mm-hmm. You know, playing top pair like it's a best hand ever, and you know, going all in when you shouldn't. I mean, your typical fishy first time players.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that's quite common. Like there's a sort of progression where people first start, and I think they're like too loose, and then the reaction to that is to tighten up too much. Then they become like kind of ABC tag, which is another approach that I strongly disagree with and try and get my students away from very quickly when they come to me for coaching. And then from there, you're kind of building up the aggression again, but doing it in a safe way. It's like having all your aggressive tools taken off you and then slowly like rebuilding them in an orderly fashion, maybe.
Yeah, I think that describes the way my poker career has gone in the last 6 years.
So, I guess like what kind of
Sorry.
We can have a bit of music effects on the podcast is always fun. About 6,000 people just driving their cars just went into their pocket there. Of those 6,000, maybe 5 or 6 probably had a collision. So, good job, Mike. I'm just kidding. So nowadays, what games do you play now, and what kind of level of poker player? It's kind of personal and hard question to answer, but what kind of level of poker player do you see yourself as now?
Yeah, so I play mainly 30 NL or 50 NL. In New Jersey, I play on 3 different sites. I play on PokerStars, World Series of Poker, and Borgata. 2 of them allow HUDs and 1 doesn't. It used to. So, I mean, I've been able to methodically move my way up each level, and not win tons of money, but I'm a winning player over time. So,
good.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to probably stay at 50 NL for a while because it's probably a good level for me, and it's probably going to take a while to really master this and become comfortable. From here, I think the players get really, really tough.
Yeah, I think there's a big jump between 50 and 100. I agree with that. So the reason I ask that is that you're not a player who has mastered like mid stakes, or who has been coaching on a training site for a number of years or anything like that. So obviously the end point of this question is that you ended up writing a book, but what first got you into what first motivated you to try to help weaker players than yourself, even though you were by no means like a poker veteran or anything like that?
Yes, that's exactly correct. I don't even think I'm a poker veteran now, even after writing a book and playing for 6 years. I still think I'm a recreational player learning. So I think after about 2 years of playing and losing, there was one day where I listened to an audiobook on the way to work, and it was about 45 minutes, and 15 minutes of it was a glossary. And I'm thinking, I could probably write a better poker book than this right now, but that's not really the reason I wrote a book. So I wrote a book to learn poker well. So you learn by teaching.
Right.
I think you know that better than anybody, but so I figured if I could write a book, it would force me to learn every technique and strategy that I use, totally 100%. And so I wrote this, I spent the next 3 years writing this book and learning every strategy. So like every chapter on some strategy, there was no race. I mean, I made sure I learned it well. I went back and listened to podcasts and did research, and then I experimented online to make sure the techniques were good. And then I felt like I knew it well enough to teach somebody else.
Yes.
But I mean, the book is targeted to those new to online. So I think somebody like me who is pretty new writing the book actually benefited me in many ways, because I could remember what I needed to learn and what was confusing to people who only were new to online, because I was relatively not that far from being new. Even after I was playing 5 years, I could still remember plus EV, I didn't even know what that was, 2-3 years ago. Instead of saying that in the book, I should say, you probably have the best hand at this point. So, I mean, I tried to write the book for somebody who was like me.
Absolutely.
So I think me being pretty new actually helped in a way.
Yeah, I actually have a similar story. Like, one of my friends was a physics teacher in high school, and I remember being in a bar one night with him and another guy who's more of a friend who is probably I could describe as quite arrogant and academic arrogant, to say the least. So he says to my friend, who's the physics teacher, something to the effect of, well, what mark did you get in your degree or whatnot? And my friend says that he got the minimum pass mark for his physics degree, and the guy's reply was something along the lines of, and you're teaching our kids this is the problem with our system, I find that an absolute disgrace, or something like that, something pretty horrible. And I remember the conversation then went a lot of people were starting to defend my friend who was a teacher, saying, well, he's actually a fantastic teacher, and to teach I don't know what the equivalent in America would be, let's say a 6th grader, right, something like that age, right, physics, or the basics of physics, or the basics of science. You have to know the basics of science well, and you have to be a really good teacher. You do not have to have understood and got full marks for a paper on a really, really contemporary advanced physics concept, right? And in some ways, if you had somebody who was incredibly good at physics and was leading in the field go and try and teach that age group or whatnot, it would probably be a disaster, or it'd be a lot worse than just a very good teacher doing that that's got a good grasp of the subject. So I think that's kind of analogous to your situation, where because you are above, your level of poker is above that of a beginner, but not so far above it that, you know, your head is in the clouds and you can't see what's in the ground. Your head's still below the cloud line in this analogy, and you can sort of see the people who are a level below you, and you can see exactly where they're going wrong. And not only can you see the mistakes they're making, but you can see perhaps the thought process that's going wrong, and you can relate to it, and you can remember the not too distant past where you exhibited some of these same mistakes, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense what you're saying.
Yeah, that's actually exactly correct to how I felt. So, I mean, many of the things that I was learning and writing in the book, you know, I had just really mastered not that long before. And when we get to maybe the proofreaders, I mean, a couple of my proofreaders were like, they play professionally, and they gave me some feedback that said, oh, that's too basic. And I would say to myself, well, you know what? I didn't even know what that was a couple of years ago. I mean, so if somebody's starting online, they may not know what that means either. So I would leave that in the book, though. When we get to the proofreaders, I mean, I got a lot of help free from a Facebook group that we can dive into a little bit later.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's very subjective, like what is too basic and what isn't. I think it's very easy for an advanced poker player these days to look at a concept and just be really ignorant about like how important that concept is for a beginner. You hear lots of horror stories, in fact, about coaches who are good players and very bad teachers just playing a session, ranting their thoughts at this person that's watching, and I don't know, there's this sort of superiority, ego, mad like attitude where because I make money playing this game and I'm a strong player, this guy will just absorb my greatness by being around me and hearing me speak. And of course, very few people learn in that way. So I think like in poker, there really is a big danger of trying to run before you can walk, and books like yours are very necessary stepping stones for beginners. I don't even think that an absolute beginner could pick up the Grounder's Manual and work through it very quickly. I don't know. I think you tried to do that when you were starting out, right? You mentioned that you read the Grounder's Manual. How did you find it as a beginner?
Yeah, that was like way too beyond me at the time. So,
right.
So I think a couple podcasts ago you said that somebody played 5 NL and used Pio Solver, that they would be using 2 NL later. By the time they got done, they're using 2 NL because it would, it's way above what they really need, and they're now using strategies where they didn't like form a solid basic fundamental strategy. And I think that's what I feel like my book is. So
right.
It enforces the fundamentals, then you can build on top of that. If they read the Grinder's Manual after, it would probably be a perfect.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I don't think for a second that a winning 500 NL player couldn't beat 2 NL playing that same strategy. They could, but I don't think that a winning 500 NL player could maximize their win rate by playing that way. I think that it's quite possible that if a pro took their game to the 2 NL pool but thought it was the 500 NL pool, that they could have a lower win rate than a 2 NL regular who was very, very up on how the pool played and was exploiting people massively but didn't have the same grasp of GTO play or whatever. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with that. But yeah, I think it is a fallacy that like Pio wouldn't be able to win at lower stakes. Like Pio might have a lower win rate, than an accomplished reg at lower stake because he's not making enough exploits, but Pio would probably make up for that in some way by just having like a better understanding of what his range should be against a random in a certain random spot or whatnot. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this book then. So you had the idea that you wanted to write a book to help people that were going through the level of learning that you'd just gone through. What was that like when you first started? Like, did you feel almost like, what have I got myself into kind of thing? Did the enormity of the project hit you like quite early on? I just say this as a fellow author because I certainly felt at times when I was writing the Grounder's Manual that like, man, why did I start this? Like, I don't even want to get out of bed because I have to write this thing. Don't know. How do you feel?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not a professional writer, and I don't even think I'm that gifted of a writer. But I mean, I just started, and I did a lot of writing like on weekends in the morning, and it became addictive. I would get up at like 7 a.m. and I would just keep writing, and next thing you know, it's noon. But I think into a year or so into it, that I was hitting that wall. I mean, I never stopped. I mean, took a break. I mean, some chapters took me 3 months, but only because, I wanted to make sure the chapter was, 100% accurate and proved out. But I mean, after about a year, I mean, one of my friends came over and I said, I'm going to be working on this thing another 3 years. Like, it's just like the way I'm going. So, I mean, I did hit that wall at one point, not where it stopped me, but it felt like I'd never finish.
Yeah, I know that feeling, absolutely. I remember taking probably 6 weeks. I mean, a lot of stuff was going on in life at that point. It was changing, like, where I was living, and loads of stuff was going on. But I remember taking 6 weeks out and just being like, I don't want to look at this thing for another 6 weeks. But then again, the Grounder's Manual ended up being 540 pages long, so that was probably my own fault for embarking on something that ridiculously large. So I guess, like, let's talk about some of the struggles for writers. Like, I'm interested to get your take on this, because I know that I have days personally where I'm writing, like, say the book I'm writing just now, which is called Poker Therapy, which is a mental game book. There will be days when it sort of flows like you were describing there. 1 minute, 7 a.m, then it's 12. But there'll be other days when, I don't know if you've experienced the same, the words just aren't coming, or like it's clumsy and you just feel like you're bashing your head off a wall. Do you ever get days like that?
Oh yeah. So a couple times I spent like 45 minutes on one paragraph. I would just rewrite. I just couldn't get the paragraph to sound, because you're explaining like poker math or c-betting or something. It doesn't just flow like a normal conversation. You have to write it to somebody else who's going to understand it.
Right.
And I just remember like just rewriting the same paragraph over and over again. And I'm here like, if I'm spending like 45 minutes on one paragraph, it's like, but other days you're just writing and it's just like coming out, and you feel like you're a good writer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely experienced that.
Yeah, like my problem with writing is conciseness. Like, I can write, and if you ask me to make a really clumsy long paragraph with loads of big words in it that sounds fancy to someone that doesn't speak English, I could do that. But like, my struggle has always been cutting out the stuff that I think sounds good but is actually just overkill and isn't necessary. It's getting that conciseness. It's a fine balance between saying everything you want to say and not doing it excessively, I think. I don't know how you feel about that, but that was my biggest challenge as a writer.
Yeah, so when we were talking beforehand, I was telling you there's one thing that I found that helped me immensely and accelerated the book. And you want me to mention that text-to-speech thing right now, or?
Yeah, what's the name of it?
It's called text-to-speech. Mm-hmm. So I have it on my iPhone, but I'm sure it's available for other devices as well. So I think not only you or I, but a lot of people have trouble proofreading their own material. You could have the or a plural in a sentence. You could read it 10 times, and you'll never see or hear it. So I was thinking, at one point I'm thinking, my Kindle talks to me. Why can't I find some device where I can have my book read to me and I could hear it? And then I found out on the iPhone there's a free app. It's called Text-to-Speech, and I would just email myself a chapter, cut and paste it into this text-to-speech, and could have it read back to me. And then I would start listening to my book on my commute back and forth to work. So it's amazing what you can pick up when you actually hear your book read to you. Like, not only grammatical errors and plurals. I mean, you say the same thing in 2 paragraphs in a row. You're like, I just said that. I just said it a different way. I need to like refine that. So Absolutely. I actually have one of my chapters loaded in the text-to-speech right now. I can like play a little bit of it so people can hear what it might sound like.
Yeah, let's have a demo.
Okay. Let's see.
Bankroll management. Managing your bankroll is vital to your poker success no matter what level you play. You do not want the size of your bankroll to influence a decision on a poker hand or one normal cold run of cards to wipe out your entire bankroll. What is bankroll management? A bankroll is money set aside to exclusively play poker.
So
nice. I like how it reads with like almost natural intonation. Like, it's not, you know, if you get like voice narrator on Windows to speak, it'll be like bankroll management, and it'll sound like, you know, Stephen Hawking's kind of like having a bad day or something like that. No, but don't disrespect to the late Stephen Hawking's, what a guy. But it sounds like those horrible 90s voice boxes. But that sounds like almost not a person, but it reads kind of naturally.
It's amazing. I mean, I've even like cut and pasted articles that I just would read back to me when I was like driving or whatever. But yeah, it messes up a few words, especially like live and live, like words that have 2 meanings, read and like read or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like you can't figure out which one you want to use. So you couldn't use it for an audiobook, but you can definitely, I mean, it's not only good for you and I for our being an author. I mean, anybody who's like in college or high school that or work that's writing a paper, they could just use this app to like proofread their stuff in like in their normal life. So I mean, this is a great little app. Nice. I would recommend it to anybody.
Am I getting like 40% of sales from this app now?
No, it's actually totally free as well. I don't know how they do it, but I mean, there's some ads at the bottom, but I love it.
Nice.
So that really helped me. I don't know if I probably would still be writing this book if I didn't have that app.
For sure. I have a relatively, compared to most writers, I have an easier time with grammar and things like that, but like that has not been a good thing because it's taught me laziness, and it's taught me like, it's okay, you can just write and it'll be fine, and you can do like one proofread and it'll be fine. Then I'll send it to my editor, and he'll be like, did you realize that like all this shit was wrong? And I'll be like, oh. So I kind of think that would help me a lot as well, even as someone who writes about poker as part of their profession, like every day. I still think I could benefit from that. Cool. So when you were writing this book and you're sort of getting through it and you're getting close to the end, how much did you have to change? Like when you'd written like the final draft, as it were, or when you'd finished the first draft, let's say, are you one of those writers that goes back and like changes everything and it's just a rough draft, or was it kind of a case of editing more meticulously as you went?
So, I mean, I edited it basically. I mean, I took it like a chapter by chapter. So I tried to finish one chapter and edit it and have it, really the way I want before I went on to the next. The great thing about a poker book is you can write a chapter on poker math, and it doesn't affect blind stealing. There's no character development beforehand. It has to like play into it, right? So each chapter is an independent, subject in itself that you can like stick on blind stealing or playing from the blinds or, positional awareness, and just write that one and get it correct. So I basically did my editing as I went on each chapter. But I mean, after I got proofreaders, I mean, that was another story. So, I mean, I worked on the book for 2.5 years, and I thought it was like the greatest book ever. Like, my book is off the hook, sort of thing. But then I gave it to a bunch of friends and family and some poker players from a Facebook group that I can talk about in a minute. But so then they gave me feedback, and most people were, very complimentary. But after like 2.5 years, I had so I wound up writing one entire new chapter and editing like 4 or 5 and combining some. And I don't know if you ever rode a bike and you're going up a hill and you see the top and you get to the top and you're like, I'm there, and then there's another hill.
Yeah.
It's almost like after writing for 2.5 years, the last thing I want to do is write another 6 months. But I mean, eventually got my wind back again and finished it up in the next 6 months. So
nice. Yeah, there's one hill like that on an island off the coast of Scotland called Arran, and this hill has just always defeated me every time I tried to cycle up it for that very reason. It's just always another peak. It's the most infuriating hill you'll ever cycle up. But back to writing, yeah, the Grounders Manual was exactly the same. That as soon as one part of it was finished and I liked that, I'd be going back and reading an earlier part. So yeah, then when I had fixed one part, and I'd sort of go back and edit that, and then I would just be reading it through another day, and I would just see something else that I hadn't noticed the first time I was reading through that was awful, and then I would have to like restructure the entire thing effectively. So yeah, writing can be one of the most rewarding things, but it can also be like one of the biggest struggles to get up and motivate yourself to do, for sure. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the actual content of the book then. First off, what is your book called? And if you want to talk a bit about what your website is and where people can find you, that'd be cool as well.
Okay, so the book's called Fundamentals of Playing Online Texas Hold'em Poker. So the target audience of the book are probably somebody who plays live that wants to get online, or somebody fairly new to online that's struggling. So, I mean, if you're a live player and you never want to get online, or if you're an online player and you're playing a long time, it's probably not the best book for you. But you probably want to buy the Grinders Manual on 100 hands if you've been playing a long time online. But so it's targeted at new poker players. So I mean, the book covers a lot of subjects. I mean, it starts out with the history of online poker, and then differences between live and online, and how to pick a site, and has like bankroll management and moving up in stakes and multi-tabling. But the core of the book, And the name of the book is The Fundamentals of Online Poker. So I identified like 8 strategic areas that I think all poker players really need to master as their core base set of fundamentals, before they move up, before they start doing crazy strategies. And they're like positional awareness and starting hands and HUDs, obviously, if you're going to be online, playing from the blinds and blind stealing, because if you're playing 6 max cash, you're going to be in the blinds or playing from the blinds or blind stealing 2/3 of the time. C-betting, which we know is a vital tool. Poker math, profiling players, and managing tilt. So there's a chapter on each one of those subjects, and each chapter starts out pretty basics, explaining, what the strategy is, and then, how to play it, what the strategies are, and then the math behind playing it, like c-betting, how much a half pot bet needs to work and 3/4 pot needs to work, and, when you should play in position, out of position, how often your opponent's going to miss the board. So I give the math behind it, and then I give the HUD stats. So I didn't really go deep into HUD stats because I only just stuck this like 7 or 8 basic ones. But so each chapter is a similar process where I follow that kind of pattern.
Yeah, I think like HUD stats in particular is something that we need to be kind of careful of when we first start playing. Like, I think the equivalent to a beginner loading up a HUD with 30 different stats or 35 different stats on it is a bit like giving a 3-year-old child, I don't know, a knife to accomplish a task that could be accomplished with something a lot less dangerous, basically. I
stuck to like 7 basic stats. You probably can figure out which ones they are, like VPIP and PFR, and then stealing, c-betting, and fold to c-bet. Those, they're the main ones. 3-betting.
Yeah.
So I mean,
the ones that converge the fastest, basically, because what we want to avoid as poker authors is, I'm sure you'll agree with this, is giving people, without qualification, just giving people stats like float flop, probe turn, fold to turn, c-bet, and expecting them to go off and just like what I find is the biggest thing people do wrong when they use a HUD is this literal stat reading, like, oh, this number is staring at me and that number is 55, therefore my opponent folds the turn 55% of the time. Like, no, he doesn't. He has folded, to whatever that is as a percentage, like he's fold, or whatever that is as a fraction. So like, say you've got 20 hands on villain, it just means he's folded 11 times out of 20 to the turn c-bet. That does not mean that he folds 11 times out of 20, right? That's a different sentence. So yeah, I found that like when I wrote Grinder's Manual, I introduced some stats really early on in that book, like fold to steal, and I said to people, they don't become very accurate over a small sample, yet I would still get students rolling in for lesson 1 being like, this guy folds 80% to steals. It's like, you have 5 hands on this guy, right? So that's just a common bugbear of mine. That's like something you need to, a pet peeve you could say, something we need to look out for. We need to really stress that. If we think we've stressed it, stress it another 10 times is my advice to any poker author, because, or at least put it in bold, put it in a box, put it somewhere that they're not going to forget it, because people have a habit of just taking the easy way out with poker, right? They have a habit of like trying to oversimplify the game. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely. So I mean, I stuck to those 7 basic stats, and I mentioned the sample size you should have for each. I mean, other than PFR and VPIP, most of them you probably want like 300 hands. I mean, before most of the other ones become relevant. So I don't know if I put it in bold, but definitely I emphasized it.
Yeah, I think like degrees of reliability is a good term here. Like, a stat doesn't need to be irrelevant or relevant. Like, I remember Poker Tracker, one of the main functions that people used to use when it first came out was the whole don't show HUD until you have 20 hands on the player, until you have 50 hands on the player. And the problem with that was it was ridiculous, because it taught people that the HUD was suddenly fully reliable at a certain point and completely unreliable before then. When in reality, it would be good if the student was trained to say, okay, I have 5 hands on villain, he's running 80-0, the chances are he's a loose passive whale, but he may not be. Like, it could be variant. So just saying, like, if there are 1,000 players who represent as 80-0 for 5 hands, maybe 750 of them will be very, very loose, and the other ones will just be running in some way hot in a collie sense as opposed to a raisy sense. I don't know. But I think, like...
Yeah, like... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go on. It's fine.
So like anything in poker, there's no hard and fast rule, even for like sample size. So I mean, if somebody played 10 hands and they have a VPIP of 80, like they played 8 of the 10, I mean, You can start to classify them like after 10 hands.
Yeah. Because you're dealing with a stat that converges very, very quickly, whereas you can't then, I guess what you're saying here is then you can't say, oh look, that guy has a fold to c-bet of 50% over 10 hands, total hands, therefore he folds to 50% of c-bets. That's crazy.
Right, but I mean, normally I think I said like 50 hands, you could look at VPIP and PFR, but that's not, maybe that's just a rule of thumb. I think you could probably even, after 10 hands, get a sense of a player immediately.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just saying, like, certain stats you would not want to make the same mistake. So just like making sure the audience is like uber careful with that. But it sounds like you've done a good job of introducing the HUD and sort of getting the live players' head around all of these weird online things that can be quite intimidating for people who don't play online and have played live for a while, right?
Yes. So, I mean, the one thing I love about online poker is not even a HUD, is the poker tracking software. Like, how does somebody improve? Like, if you're playing ace five suited from early position and you played, 50,000 hands, how do you even know if that was profitable or not? If you're playing live or without a HUD, like, how can you profile yourself? Like, to me, the great thing about poker tracking software is I can go back and look at each position and look at the starting hands in each position and see which ones I'm losing money on and kind of like make a note to not play those from early position and, see where me and my opponents are having success and failures. I mean, I play on 3 sites and I don't even play on the easiest one because that doesn't have a HUD, because I think for me to improve, I need this database of hands and to analyze and data mine my own play so I can see where I'm losing money or making money and improve. So to me, that is the beauty of online poker, and I mean, I emphasize that in the book as well. But I mean, I can't even imagine playing if they ever ban HUDs. It's not even the HUDs, it's the poker tracking software I love even more than the HUDs.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. I think like a lot of live players don't actually understand that when we are analysing our game, all we're analysing is the hands that we've played, and we could have tracked those ourselves manually, right? If you were a bit of a sicko, you could sit there and write down every single hand you ever played and compile it into a database. So this software is not any AI that's giving you an edge that you shouldn't get. It's not illegal, it's not immoral. It's just a way of efficiently using technology to organise the stuff you're playing, and this happens in sports all the time. In sports analysis, you will see these days. I'm going to use your sport here, and you can correct me when I make an absolute buffoon out of myself because I don't know anything about American football, but let's take American football. I'm sure that in the dressing room now there is a plasma screen for the Seattle Seahawks or whoever it happens to be, and there's arrows and PowerPoints being drawn and all kinds of crazy analysis going on. Why can't we do the same? We play poker online, we do the same thing. So if you are a live player and you're sitting there thinking, oh, these HUDs are just these cheating gizmos that people use to get an unfair edge, well, actually it's no different to just making the most out of modern technology in any sport. It's not like you're running a robot that's making decisions for you. But that said, people need to be careful when they first get this stuff, and that's why I think a book like yours is quite important, like to sort of show people what the nuts and bolts of online poker are if they're making that transition. And I'd imagine that's your main target audience is people who are making that transition, or at least a big part of it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're just online for maybe a year or two or just new to online and you're struggling, then you probably benefit from my book. But, once you, probably most of your listeners for your podcast are maybe more experienced in playing online for a while, they, if you probably maybe the Grinder's Manual might be a better idea for them. But, I mean, there is a target audience, and, I wouldn't want to sell anybody this book that didn't really, I don't want to missell it and just say what it's for. So I mean, if you're live and you want to get online, or you're just new to online, then I think this book would be very beneficial.
Yeah, you could go around, like, find all the guys from the early noughties and late 90s who first popularized the game, like Mike the Mouth and Phil Hellmuth and Doyle Brunson, and get them to buy your book and join us in the modern world. Poker's come a long way since then. So maybe that could be your calling, Mike. Maybe you could go around and get the Phil Hellmuths of the world to play online and use HUDs. Who knows? But yeah, that sounds like a necessary filler for the poker community. I think Grounder's Manual is Is a book you can pick up as a beginner? Absolutely. I don't think that you need to have a certain amount of experience before you can pick that book up. It is an entry-level book. However, it does go quickly, and if you are wanting to learn poker and at a leisurely pace and you don't want to overload yourself with a frantic kind of, I guess, a steep incline, then this book sounds like it could be something that's a good way of bridging the gap, for sure.
Yep. So one thing I want to mention is when I started on 2013, I was actually looking for a book on online poker, not even a new one, just for online poker. There wasn't really much available or anything back then. And even now, for players new to online poker, I mean, other than my book, I don't really see a lot available targeted at people new to online. So I like to tell people, and I wrote it in the beginning of the book, I wrote the book that I was looking for when I first started playing online, but I couldn't find. So I filled the gap that I wish I had this book when I started. So I wrote the book, basically I wish I had when I first started.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of like part of my motivation.
Absolutely. What do you think about the mental game then? Because you mentioned that you have a chapter on this. Like right now I'm trying to write an entire book on kind of mental game things. Poker Therapy is the sort of book where we're going to be talking about basically why humans aren't well adapted to the environment of poker, like why their brain misfires, why they have not just tilt, like outward raging tilt, but just all kinds of mental game issues in various directions, and how to rewire the mind, basically using a protocol I use on students. But I am obviously like I've done some research for this book and I've talked to some people, but whenever I speak to someone who's written a bit and researched the mental game, I just like to hear their take on it, really. So what's for your target audience, which is like your fairly pure beginner, what are your main sort of mental game tips for them?
Yeah, so I mean, everybody tilts. I mean, I'm a little bit older than most of the players, and I think I'm pretty mentally tough, but I mean, I tilt just like everybody else, maybe just not as much. But so I mean, most of these are going to be like pretty common things. So obviously, if you're tilting, you can like take a break and do something like push-ups or walk around the block or talk to somebody, and then come back and restart like a fresh start. Or you can actually, if you're playing multiple sites like me, you can actually let's close the entire site and open a new one. And it doesn't sound like it would work, but it's amazing that could work as well. But I think somebody like me really they know they're on tilt, but they don't want to stop. I mean, they worked all day, they're playing it at night, they waited all day to play, they're on tilt, they don't care. They're just going to keep playing. So how do you recover from tilt while you're playing? So everybody should come up with their own idea, but I have one thing that I actually did that really helped me is I made like in American football, they have these play sheets that the coach holds up straight like it's a rigid animated thing. I made a thing with cardboard with all my starting hands and some advice. And whenever I was on tilt, like just spewing money, I would just put that in my non-mouse hand and hold it up, and I would just say to myself, I am not playing a hand that's not in my starting range by position, and until I recover it and stop playing stupidly. So I would just, before every hand, I would just glance over at that chart. If that hand wasn't in that starting range, even though it's playing robotic and rigidly, but when you're out of control, I'm pretty sure you're playing too many hands, for sure, and you're probably wildly betting. So, I mean, well, that won't get all your money back, but that helped me, like, recover and get back into my, standard playing strategy, and maybe I wouldn't spew anymore. Maybe I probably wouldn't win it all back, but that was one thing. I mean, there was another tip I heard that I actually tried a few times, is taking your hand off the mouse and putting it on your opposite shoulder, so it forces you to think for a few extra seconds. So I put a couple of tips in the book like that. I didn't say people should do it, but I did it as a way, like, these are what I do, and you need to develop, you can try these. If they work, fine, but if they don't, you can develop things on your own, like, that will help you.
Yeah, I think everyone's different when it comes to tilting. There's two aspects to tilt as far as I'm concerned. Is like what we do about it to damage limit in game, which is what you're talking about there, and I think those are all really good ideas. And then there's like the root cause. I think everyone tilts for different reasons, and we all have different mental programming that causes us to tilt. Or in my book I call it misfire, because I don't think that I think that tilt sometimes is a word that can be used a little bit narrowly. Like sometimes when people hear tilt, they don't think about the compulsion to study all night to avoid playing because you're afraid of playing, right? But in my mind, that's a mental game leak. So the reason I use the word rewire and misfire in poker therapy was that I wanted to sort of talk about a lot of mental game problems other than the classic I'm playing too many hands, I'm spewing money, I'm angry. I wanted to talk about like a bunch of other things, and a lot of those other things, when I got into it, I discovered that they're not just about emotions, but they're about root causes, and they're about long-term mental programming, like the way humans are wired from an early age, maybe just archaic stuff like how your parents treated you, what school life was like, what the neighborhood was like, what kind of ways you learn to adapt and cope and survive in your environment, and how they can come back after many years, even, you know, a long time, like decades, and bite you in the ass as a poker player and cause you to have all these weird irrational conditionings. So I think that, like, for someone who has regular mental game problems, they do need to try things like hand off the mouse on the opposite shoulder. I think that's a great one. I use that on students myself all the time. But I think they also have to, if it's a severe problem, they have to explore where it comes from in order to actually diffuse it. And that's kind of what I try to do in poker therapy. We're looking at about around November now, guys. So if you're listening, by the way, for a release date, hopefully early November, that'll be available on Carrot Corner. And if you keep listening, carrotcorner.com, if you keep listening to the podcast, we will update you with a promo code and things like that. So do you want to talk a little bit, just before we wrap up, about your website, Mike, and how people can go ahead, what's on there, and how people can go ahead and grab your book if they want to do that?
Yeah, so I mean, my book is on Amazon. So I mean, I self-published on Amazon, so I never used the publisher as well. So I use like CreateSpace and Kindle Create, and I published on Amazon. But I wrote so I have a website. It's called playgreatpokercom. So I wanted to have a link in the book. I didn't have a website when I was writing the book, but I'm here like if I want to continue on with my poker, you know, editing content, I need to have some website. I need to link in the book before the book is published, because I won't be able to change, you know, a paperback. So it's called playgreatpoker.com, and it has strategy articles and links to, you know, poker tracker software and Hold'em Manager, and it has a list of all, you know, the poker books that I've read and recommend, including 2 of your books, and podcasts, and your podcast is on there as well. So, I mean, if people want to check that out. So it's a way for me to continue on, you know, doing content and you know, working on poker things. It's a kind of, I also review training sites. So, I mean, if somebody wants to check that site out, and, you know, they can contact me through that site, through the Contact Us page, or Mike Matteo at playgreatpoker.com. So if they have any feedback, if they think the site's good or bad, or if they have an article they want to contribute or a link they want added, you know, I'd be happy to hear from them. If they want to hear about my book or writing a book, I'd be happy to, you know, correspond with them. Or if they just want to talk about playing poker, I mean, just reach out to me either on that website or at, you know, that email, Mike Matteo, playgreatpoker.com. But so my book, just wanted to mention that it is on Amazon in both paperback for $14.99 and Kindle for $7.99, and it's on Gumroad. It's a PDF for also $7.99. So I was able to self-publish, which is probably another 5-minute subject.
Yeah.
So I mean, so Amazon has something called CreateSpace, and this Kindle Create that, you know, is another, on top of writing your book and getting proofread, add another couple months of tediously formatting your book to look good. So I think I heard you way back on the day talk about your grinder's manual and how you were upset trying to get it into Kindle. I think on one of really old podcasts.
Yeah, like the
so one thing I want to ask you is, you never did an audio book.
I didn't. I mean, no.
You're such a natural speaker. I would listen. I'm probably one of the most boring guys in the world. I'd probably listen to it on my commute back and forth to work, even though it's 540 pages.
Yeah.
And it'd probably be like, I mean, one of Jonathan Little's book is like 35 hours of an audio book. I think the Grinder's Manual would be even more. I'm not sure how it would transfer to audio book, but I would be one to buy it and listen to it, because I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nice idea. I think it's always a case as a sort of entrepreneur who's like a one-man machine, you know, like I am, or like you are with your book sales by the sounds of it. There's lots of things that you would do if you had departments and you had people working for you and you had more resources, but when it's just you yourself, you kind of have to prioritize. So there are lots of ideas that people say to me, Pete, why don't you do X? Why don't you make a revised version of Grounder's Manual? Why don't you do this, do that? And I agree with many of them, and I think that's a really worthwhile thing, Mike. But I'm writing Poker Therapy, and I'm dragging myself downstairs out the door to a coffee shop with my laptop, just so I've got the motivation to write, because sitting at home I don't have it right now, and I'm going through a period where it's enough just to get up and do that, because I'm coaching and I'm teaching poker and I'm playing poker and I'm making articles and I'm doing all this other content as well. So yeah, I guess we just have to choose. It's that simple. We have to shun tons of ideas, right? We can't do everything, but I'd love to. But
no, I get it. So, I mean, somebody has said to me that the audiobook market was growing 20% a year. I mean, I'd love to do it. I'm not a gifted reader out loud, which is probably be another, tedious, long journey for myself to try to make an audiobook out of this. Maybe I will try a chapter one day. But, I mean, I do love audiobooks. I want to ask you about that, because I know your book's only on Kindle as well. But
there is a PDF that you can get via carrotcorner.com. Which I prefer that people get. So if you're going to buy the Grounder's Manual or 100 Hands, just go via my store that you can find on my website. That's www.carrotcorner.com. And the PDF is, the reason I rather you buy that is that I get more money for that, because it doesn't go to the publishers, right? So that's why I released it in both formats as well. Amazon gets you a lot of hits, right? Because it's a great way of reaching out to people. Just unfortunately, you keep less of the cherry at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's Amazon said on their Create site that it's one of the best search engines in the world. I mean, so you just have it there and people find it. But I remember talking about it before, like buy it off my site because Amazon takes too much. So I can relate to that.
That's a trade-off, You get more volume through Amazon, you get more exposure. You don't get as many of the royalties, obviously, as a result. Right, final thing then. Let's wrap up, because we're hitting around our target time, and I need to go make some food as well, because if the girlfriend comes in, there's no food on the table. I'm a housewife, work from home, have to do the cooking, right? Modern world, crazy times that we live in, right? Final thing though, if I am an aspiring player, I'm a beginner, and I'm at the level of your target audience for your book, what are your top, 1, 2, 3 tips that you would give me to get me started out on the right path?
Okay, so I would combine these 3 things. So positional awareness and starting hands, c-betting, and player profiling. So, I mean, you get into the position and, get the starting hands. Don't, play every position with the same starting range. I think a lot of people know that, but I mean, play in position and get the lead and profile players. When I log on, every one of my players is profiled, like a fish with like 35-3 and a 3-bet of 1. I get that guy on my left because I know he's not going to raise me or 3-bet me. So I do a lot of table selecting, and I'm like a robot now. I mean, if I'm at a table and I have somebody weak at my left and they drop off, I just shut that table and open a new one. I play like 4 to 8 tables at once. So if you profile your players and get your weak passive players on your left and on your right as well, so then you can take the lead and 3-bet and without the fear of getting 4-bet or raised. So if you play hands in position, this might be like a nitty ABC strategy, but somebody reading this book might benefit from this. So, play your hands by position, get the lead, get players on your left that aren't going to be raising you and driving you crazy, and go to the flop and c-bet. C-bet, every people who are more experienced know how powerful the c-bet is, how often it has to work for the bet size. If you filter on your poker tracking software on c-betting, pretty much in position, I think most people will have positive outcomes. So if you combine those 3 things together, and I think that will get you really rolling and started. And, that player selecting, that's very important. So, I just go onto the lobby and I can look through the lobby and see each table and see if there's, tough regs, which I color code in red, or fish that are yellow, and I'll put them on the waiting list, the tables with the fish, and then if it pops up, if the seat isn't good, I just close it. And if it's good, I take it. And if one of my tables, if the player at the left leaves and a tough player comes in, I just close that table. So I always try to be in the best situations and and rarely limp, just raise and take the lead. And I mean, you can't be robotic about that. You have to be some intelligence about the other players. But if you can, for somebody new starting online, to combine positional awareness, c-betting, and player profiling together, I think that would be a good start for somebody who would buy this book.
Very nice. I think it's really key as well what you said there about in position c-betting, making a profit. Like, if you're not making money in that situation, I don't know what the hell you must be doing wrong. You must be like shoving the turn all in with air every single time you get called or something, because that is, like you said, just a bread and butter money earning spot. I have to completely disagree with one thing you said though.
Okay.
Regs are yellow and fish are blue. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think my color coding might be different than some other people I heard, but
it's completely subjective. I'm only messing. Like, each to their own.
Yeah.
I just wanted to like wind you up slightly. Anyway, like, I think you've been a really interesting guest. Tell us your website one more time.
Playgreatpoker.com.
Awesome. So go to that, guys.
The name of the book's a little bit long. So it's Fundamentals of Playing Online Texas Hold'em Poker. I know it's a little long, but I wanted to get all the keywords into the title.
Absolutely. Nice. Okay, Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show today. That's been a really fascinating discussion. For the rest of you listeners, we'll be back again next week as always. If you would like to come on the show, as Mike has today, and you have a slightly unique or interesting angle on your poker career that you would like to talk about, I would love to have you. Just email me, admin@carrotcorner.com, or add me on Skype as Characters, and we can talk there. And in the meantime, do check out all the other episodes of this podcast and carrotcorner.com as well for lots more content. And if you are looking for something a little more advanced in Mike's book, or you've read Mike's book, there's always the Grounders Manual and then 100 hands on there. If you buy the Grounders Manual first via my store on carrotcorner.com, I will send you an Amazon Kindle version. Just email me, admin@carrotcorner.com. I'll send you that for free if you just show me that you've bought the book. And you can get 25% off 100 hands, a sequel, by doing that. The little offer will flash up for you there. So we'll see you on episode 81 in a week's time. Thanks for listening, guys.